Greetings, everyone, from snowy New York City, and thank you for joining us for our second webinar of 2020, Discovering Wesselmann. As you may know, the WPI is responsible for the Tom Wesselmann Catalogue Raisonné project, and we have digitized many of the artist's archives as part of this undertaking. Apropos of tonight's webinar, we're pleased to announce that a selection of the Tom Wesselmann papers will be available on our website early in 2021. Tonight, Huffa Frobes-Cross, project manager of the Wesselmann Catalogue Raisonné, and Samantha Rowe, our resident archivist, will be discussing how these newly digitized archives have informed and shaped the research of this project. For the next 45 minutes, Huffa and Samantha will be presenting their work, and we encourage you to please type your questions into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. At about 5:50, we'll close the Q&A, allowing for Huffa and Sam to answer some of your questions, and I'll return at the very end with some announcements before we conclude at 6. So let's begin, and I'll turn the stage over to Huffa.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks, everybody, for joining. I'll just start by giving everyone I think I lost everyone there for a second. I hope I am back. Am I back? I'm back. Excellent. Okay.
You're back. You're back.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I'll start by giving everyone a brief introduction to the Tom Wesselmann Corpus and Digital Catalogue Raisonné. So the project is a close collaboration between the Wildenstein Platter Institute and the estate of Tom Wesselmann. And it's really in two parts. It's working towards an eventual digital catalogue raisonné. And at this point, the most public part of it is what you're seeing in front of you, which is the Tom Wesselmann digital corpus. This is a relatively unusual undertaking in terms of catalogue raisonné, in the sense that as we're working towards our research, the digital corpus will be an evolving online document where you will be able to see our research going forward. As we have things that we're ready to publish, they will appear there, and you will be able to actually keep track and access our research as we work towards a catalogue raisonné. So rather than being the kind of project where you know that this project is in existence, but might have to wait 10 or 20 years to see a finished product, you will actually be able to see our work as it progresses. The corpus is based on the records of Tom Wesselmann himself and the estate and all of the works that are recorded there. Currently in the corpus, we have recorded all of what Tom Wesselmann classified as his unique major works, which is a specific classification in his records, along with what he classified as his oil studies. We will eventually also include drawings and prints. Those will be forthcoming. Just a basic outline of how to understand what you're seeing if you visit the corpus. At this point, any work that is recorded in Wesselmann's records, of the estate records, that has not yet been reviewed by the Wildenstein Platter Institute will appear in black and white on the corpus. When we've reviewed a work and are ready to publish information on the work, we turn that work to color. So that's when you'll see the full cataloging, all of the information about the work. And so we've just yesterday published a whole batch of new works on the corpus, and we will be doing so on a roughly quarterly schedule going forward. So definitely keep an eye out for that. If you have not yet already, I would encourage you to subscribe to the WPI's Verso newsletter, which will absolutely keep you informed of any of those things. So now I'll talk a little bit about the specific thoughts behind this presentation, which is really about how the research that I do and that the Tom Wesselmann Digital Catalogue Raisonné team does depends upon and works from the archives that Sam is working on. And what's interesting about this project is that early on, we were able to digitize the bulk of the estate's archive. And so we have an enormous archive from Wesselmann and the estate to work from. And so Sam and I frequently collaborate, and aspects of the archive that are relevant to my research frequently are passed to me from her and allow me to make progress that otherwise would be impossible. Another thing that, just to note, and I'll come back to this again, that's unique about this is because we have sort of moved ahead of the game and digitized all of these things in advance of this project, even this year when in-person research has become extraordinarily restricted, we've been able to make a lot of progress that otherwise would be impossible. So now I'll pass it off to Sam and let her give an introduction to the archives themselves.
Thank you, Huffa. In 2019, the Wildenstein Platter Institute and the estate of Tom Wesselmann partnered in order to digitize the Tom Wesselmann Papers for the development of the digital catalogue raisonné of Tom Wesselmann. As you can see displayed on the screen are samples of materials that I pulled from the archives. The Tom Wesselmann Papers consist of a vast assortment of correspondence, photographs, artist inventory records, printed ephemera, as well as administrative materials, which offers researchers the advantage to have a comprehensive look at Wesselmann's artistic career and oeuvre. In comparison to other collections I have actually worked on, conducting archival processing on the Tom Wesselmann Papers was quite a unique experience for me, since I knew that my work on the collection would directly impact the Catalogue Raisonné team and the progress of their research. I'm actually more accustomed to simply completing the work and not having the benefit of knowing how future researchers engage with or utilize the archival collection. So my collaboration with the Catalogue Raisonné team was rewarding as I got to see firsthand how these primary sources could begin to resolve gaps in our research. In addition to simply providing descriptions, arrangements, and cataloging the collection, I was also tasked with identifying any noteworthy findings which I deemed as useful or that might be relevant to the Catalogue Raisonné team. A number of these discoveries, which we will soon explore, inspired us to host tonight's webinar. Now I'm going to turn it back to Huffa, who will briefly discuss the overview of today's webinar.
Great, yeah, so I'll give just a brief introduction to what we're going to talk about tonight and then move into the first of these three subjects. So the first thing we're going to talk about are the artist inventory records, and specifically a set of images that Wesselmann kept in which he recorded important information related to especially Provenance, but also medium and other things that we have used and that have been integral to our research. The second thing that we'll talk about is a really interesting aspect of Wesselmann's correspondence that we have in our archive, which are the correspondence that he conducted with companies to procure billboard materials that he would use for his collages. And so in particular, Sam will focus on that. And then we'll end with a specific case study of Still Life number 53, which is a work that was made in multiple editions, but each work in that edition is treated as a unique work and presents a kind of unique set of challenges from a research perspective, and also presented, once we did the research, a particularly good example of how archives and Catalogue Raisonné research could work together. Okay, so let's start with the artist inventory records. So one thing to introduce this is that one of the things that's a real advantage to working on someone like Tom Wesselmann is that he was a meticulous record keeper. The records that he kept include not only these images that we will look at, but also a ledger book in which he recorded all of his works and that recording those ledger books actually serve as the basis of the works that were recorded in the corpus. And we're able to draw from all of these sources to really get a kind of grounding that the Catalogue Raisonné can work from. One of the things that was sort of digitized early on were these artist inventory images, and there's something that Sam processed also fairly early on, and that I have been using, I would say, almost every day to conduct research on Wesselmann's works. So I'm just going to take you through a little bit of how I do that. And I'll do that in two phases. First, I'll just show you a kind of example of how I've processed this information, looking at still life number 38. And then I'm going to go through a kind of mini case study looking at a work that we just published on the corpus and show you how I use these images, among other things, to create a document of the provenance and to finish the necessary research on that work. So first, I'll just show you how these images get processed. So I'll just look at the next slide and give you a look at that. Great. Yeah, so this just gives you a sense of the work that I often do in processing this. So this is a work that's now live on the corpus. And as you can see on the right, on the back of this image, Wesselmann recorded some elements of provenance along with a good description of some of the elements used in the work and the date. But of course, as you can see, these things are not necessarily ordered in a way that a researcher would immediately understand unless they've familiarized themselves with Wesselmann's archive. So part of the work that I've done is then going in, becoming familiar with the way he records these things and translating that into formalized provenance that you eventually see on the corpus. And that's what you can see the result of on the left. So these are both images from our database system on the back end, showing how I have sort of worked up the provenance for this, in part based on the artist inventory image. And so basically what you're seeing here is how I've kind of gone through, looked at these various elements, compared them with other documents and figured out, for example, that when this says Harry Abrams on the left, donated to Core, sold, that in fact, that actually means that it was donated to Core prior to the Harry Abrams acquisition, and that we can for sure know that Tom Wesselmann was the one who donated this work to Core, translating that into a kind of more clear provenance. One of the most important things that our system allows us to do that will eventually also be available on the public display, you can see just very sort of briefly down on the bottom there under the provenance event, I can actually link the primary sources that I'm drawing from for these conclusions that I'm putting in the provenance into the specific provenance event that I'm listing. So this basically allows us to, on the back end, see whenever I'm checking something exactly why something is the way it is, what's the research that backs it up. I can go directly and look at that. And eventually in the public display, we are going to start to roll this out as well. So a researcher or just someone coming to look at the website would be able to not only sort of look through our provenance publicly, but also be able to look at the documents that back that up, which is very much a part of our ambition at the WPI to make this kind of research more transparent, more accessible, and more usable, really, by researchers. Okay, so with that, let me go to this specific example. Okay, so this is Smoker number 26 from 1978. It's an important work in one of Wesselmann's most important series, his Smoker series. And it is actually just published on the Corpus as of yesterday, so you can go on and look at it there. You see on the left the artist inventory image for the work, and on the right the way it looks in the public display on the Corpus right now. So before I go into the specifics of this work, I'll just give you a brief introduction to this series and give you a sense of why this work is important in Wesselmann's body of work, and then I will show you kind of how we went about putting the research together to publish this work. So I'll just look at the next slide, and so this is just to show you a bit of the series that this work is from. Wesselmann started making works that he called mouths in about 1965, or in exactly 1965. And these were shaped canvas works. So they're all works in which he creates an oil painting on a specifically shaped canvas with an isolated mouth. These works developed over time, so that initially these were specifically isolated mouths. But around 1967, he makes a change, which eventually persists throughout the entire rest of the series. At one point while he's making them, one of the models who was modeling for his work, a model by the name of Peggy Sarno, took a smoke break. And he noticed that he was particularly fascinated with the way that the smoke and the cigarette and her mouth interacted, and decided to move on from just doing isolated mouths to specifically doing mouths with a smoking cigarette. So those start in 1967. And you can see the very first one, he didn't actually title Smoker, he still titled Mouth. And then Smoker number 1 comes very soon after that. The difference being that in Smoker number 1, there is actually smoke, not just cigarette. And then he continued these all the way through, depending on how you quantify them, 1978 or 1980, which is when the official Smokers series ends, to even into 2003, if you consider some of the later works that he did. So maybe go to the next slide and I'll talk a bit about that. So yeah, so all the way up until the last day, the last year of his life, he worked on these motifs of a smoking cigarette and a mouth. You can see from 2003, he returned to this subject. So this is an extremely important series and motif in his work. And Smoker number 26, 1978 is I think a particularly important work, in part because you can also see how he took this composition almost directly, turned it into a sculptural form in a very closely contemporaneous work about the same time. And in a bit, after I finish my own discussion, Sam will also talk about very interesting aspects related to the specific model that was used for this work. So now, after giving you a bit of a sense of the importance of this work and where it sits in Wesselmann's body of work in general, I'd like to talk a little bit about how we did the research on Smoker number 26 and how that made use of the archive. So I can, great. So you can see here that Wesselmann recorded a little bit on the back of this artist inventory image, specifically that this work was at the Tokyo Central Museum at a certain point, and that it was sold. Again, this is some good clues, but it requires a bit of extra work. We also knew from the estate that this work was in Toyama in Japan, but the museum that it was at had actually closed in 2017, been renamed and reopened, creating a kind of another set of challenges. So we had this artist inventory image saying Tokyo Central Museum, the sense that it was sold, which from previous experience of these artist inventory images, the way that that was recorded I was pretty certain that that meant that it was sold through Wesselmann's usual gallery, which was the Sidney Janis Gallery. And we knew that it had ended up in a Toyama museum. But we needed some more documentation. Eventually, we were also able to get in touch with the Toyama Museum and confirm that it was there, which was great. But they actually had no more provenance information than we did. So we had to return again to the archive to do more work. And if we can go to the next slide, I'll show you a little bit about how we did that. So this is actually one of those things, when I found this for the first time, I think I said to Sam that I really wish that everyone wrote letters like this. As a catalogue raisonné researcher, having a letter that is as direct as this is kind of incredible, you know, that it says right at the very beginning, we, the Tokyo Central Museum, have purchased Mr. Wesselmann's artwork, Smoker number 26, from Sidney Janis Gallery in New York City. This is kind of laying something out with such directness was fantastic. So we knew then that this indication that it had been the Tokyo Central Museum was confirmed. We had that. And we were able then to basically trace a chain of ownership to the Toyama Museum, even adding to their own records, because as I said, they didn't actually have this record that it had come through the Tokyo Central Museum before getting there. And they acquired it almost immediately after the Tokyo Central Museum had it and have had it ever since. So with that, we were able to put that entire chain together and be confident that this was something that we could publish. And again, one of the things to reemphasize is that eventually we are going to roll this out so that what I'm explaining to you here will be transparently available on the digital corpus. You'll actually be able to look at the entry and see all of these things documenting all of our steps. But this is a really good example of how a letter that Sam processed and organized in such a way that I would be able to actually find by searching for the elements listed in this letter led directly to completing a piece of provenance that otherwise would have been impossible. And again, something that if we had to do this physically would have basically been indefinitely delayed in 2020. And so now I'll pass it back to Sam.
Great, thank you. So yeah, thank you, Huffa. So after conducting a survey of the Tom Wesselmann Papers, the Artist Inventory Record Series had actually been my entry point into processing the collection into CAT, which is our custom design cataloging software. My involvement in cataloging and arranging the artist inventory records had been a relatively straightforward process, partly because Wesselmann had been a fantastic record keeper. At the Wesselmann studio, where the physical archives are located, these records are housed in a thick binder. My focus for this series was to ensure that that the digital scans of these records mimic the original order of how these inventories were maintained and kept by Wesselmann. Therefore, the materials have been arranged into folders and grouped by the titles of Wesselmann's series, such as Bedroom Paintings, Great American Nude, Still Lifes, among others. Since these photographs were used as inventory records of artworks, the image on the front depicts the artwork itself, and then there are usually annotations written along the borders that identify the artwork's title, dimensions, medium, and the date of creation. The backs of these images include reference numbers, prices, and information pertaining to sales and other provenance. As my work on the collection progressed, I was able to draw connections between disparate materials within the archives. I should mention that in addition to being an archivist, I also frequently played the role as detective while processing the artist's papers. As I spent a great deal of time surveying and arranging these archival materials, from reading Wesselmann's correspondence and digesting its content, sourcing clues that often led to discovering exhibitions that he might have participated in but were not recorded in our database, or finding information that didn't even match our records, in addition to reviewing receipts and invoices from galleries and vendors, and his administrative records, and the many, many photographs captured of him. all of which formed an expansive network of knowledge that enabled me to form relationships between these archival works and the corresponding artwork, and often even beyond the artwork itself. For instance, this letter, dated October 18th, 1979, written by a curator from the Tokyo Central Museum, informs Wesselmann in just the first few sentences that the museum had in fact purchased Smoker 26 from the Sidney Janis Gallery, which in turn confirms that our records of the provenance of the work had been accurate. This black and white photograph of Wesselmann seated in front of Smoker number 26 is a prime example of how these archival materials can be self-referential. Since the image captures Wesselmann, the artist, and his work of art, which is featured in the background. Collectively, each subject contributes to the overall narrative of the artwork itself, which in this case is Smoker 26. But to delve more deeply beyond what was photographed and to center your attention on the subject of the painting itself, you will identify a close-up of those iconic red lips and neatly polished nails that appear in many of Wesselmann's Smoker series. Actually, while Huffa and I were preparing for this webinar, we were able to confirm the identification of the model behind these iconic red lips as film director and screenwriter Danielle Thompson, which is significant considering her name appears throughout the archives, particularly in relation to correspondence and a series of black and white photographs of her modeling. Danielle had met Wesselmann in the 1960s at one of his openings at Sidney Janis Gallery. And after they spoke, he invited her to model for him. And from what I could gather after reading their correspondence, they became quite good friends. Throughout the late 1960s and 70s, Danielle had posed for several of his grand scale Smoker series, 3 of which are displayed here, as a hand and lip model since Wesselmann admired her for her long and elegant fingers. She is also captured in 4 of his bedroom paintings. And just as an aside, bedroom painting number 30 is actually one of the artworks that has recently been included on the Wesselmann digital corpus, so check that out. And of course, the 4th artwork that she appeared in is bedroom painting number 27, which had been commissioned by Danielle's former husband, Richard Thompson. In bedroom painting number 27, Danielle appears as both the reclining figure in the foreground as well as the face in the framed photograph in the background. The focus of tonight's webinar has been about discoveries, but our intentions are not to make these research findings exclusive to only benefiting the development of our Catalogue Raisonné project. The future of our tech will host a linking feature permitting our users to draw and establish connections between archival records and the artworks, exhibitions, auctions, or publications that the archival works reference in real time, which we hope will ultimately enhance the user's overall experience. Although this feature is still in development, our tech team is working hard to expand this function to operate across our entire platform, including on the WPI digital archives. So now we're going to turn our attention to the Billboard Correspondence. As mentioned earlier, the archives include an assortment of correspondence, and among them includes a collection of letters that are dated approximately from 1962 to 1971 that are commonly referred to by the Wesselmann studio as the Billboard Correspondence. During this period, Wesselmann connected with a number of large companies and advertising agencies requesting from companies like Coca-Cola to mail him life-size reproductions of their advertising ephemera so he could include them in his still life collage paintings and landscapes. These letters serve as a gateway to better comprehend Wesselmann's artistic process as well as his working methods from start to finish. The process began while Wesselmann traveled. He frequently encountered billboards that depicted images that piqued his interest, so he would record these items on lists as potential subjects to include in his still life works. As you will see here, I've provided 2 examples of these lists sourced from the archives. Among the items listed, the ones that are circled in red indicate that he was interested in Pabst beer and oranges, which I like to consider as breadcrumbs, as they offer insight on how Wesselmann envisioned his art. The next step for Wesselmann would be to reach out to the companies and agencies that produce these posters, asking if he could obtain copies of the advertising material for his art. After the company or agency consented, they would send him the materials. he had requested so he could then begin his work on creating this body of large-scale still life and landscape works. The image seen on the left of the screen is an example of one of his request letters. On July 21st, 1962, Wesselmann wrote to the art director of the Continental Baking Company, requesting if they would send him copies of what he describes as a, quote, large, nice picture of Wonder Bread, end quote, that he had seen one day on a passing delivery truck. Since Wesselmann wrote to many different companies and advertising agencies, he needed to ensure that he kept himself organized. So in addition to those lists of billboards we had seen in the previous slide, he also maintained a series of checklists to keep track of his communications. On these documents, he recorded the names of the companies he had requested materials from, and he also kept notes as to the status of his correspondence, such as whether his request to a specific company was received, or perhaps that it had been accepted, and even in certain scenarios, even rejected, or if whether a company referred him to follow up with another agency to touch base with. He would keep track of all of his outgoing letters by recording the dates in which he wrote them and marked if whether he had to follow up or not. I very much enjoyed reviewing these materials because it reflects another side of Wesselmann's character. We often only recognize him as an artist, but from these records, one can also acknowledge and appreciate him as a working artist who also happened to be a very meticulous record keeper. Materials like these, as well as others in the archives, reveal aspects of his coherent systems of organization and provide insight on how he kept track of his work, which in a broader sense informs us of how he thought about his art. Another intriguing aspect about the Billboard Correspondence is that the more time you spend analyzing the content of these letters, the more you will begin to recognize that Wesselmann had established a rapport with many of these companies. This notion is exemplified with company Four Roses Distillery. In still life number 15, which features a graphic of a Four Roses whiskey bottle, was created by Wesselmann in 1962. However, the letter on the right, which is dated December 9th, 1963, informs us that Wesselmann had followed up and remained in contact with the same company over a period of time in order to request that they continue to send him materials for future works. Letters such as this reveal that many of these large companies and advertising agencies were supportive and willing to continue bestowing him with these printed materials in order to help facilitate with his future projects. And to conclude this evening's webinar, Huffa will introduce still life number 53, a work that's actually an edition of 4. We decided to feature this work in tonight's webinar as it epitomizes the importance of archival research and how primary source material can be so vital and instrumental toward helping to resolve questions directly relating to provenance. So without further ado, Huffa, you want to take it away?
Great, thank you, Sam. So as I did with smoker number 26, I want to also just give you a sense of why this is an important work in Tom Wesselmann's body of work. And then I will go into the specific issues of our research on it, because as Sam said, rather, this is really a great example of collaboration between archives and catalogue raisonné research. So first, let me just tell you a little bit about this work and how it fits into a sort of small body of work, smallish body of work in Wesselmann's career. So on the left, you see still life number 24. In this work, there is a plastic corn on the cob, and this is, you know, a typical kind of element of signage. It's an element of signage that you would potentially see today. In this case, in still life number 24, it was actually something that Wesselmann purchased, and not purchased like with the Billboard Correspondence, which actually he largely didn't pay for, but actually from a very specific person. He was fascinated by these signs, in particular by this one, and apparently found a Coney Island corn on the cob vendor, and recounts in his book, Slim Stealingworth, which he wrote under the name Slim Stealingworth, this incident where he basically offered this Coney Island corn on the cob vendor $50, to which he replied that he would sell his own mother for $50 and gave him the plastic corn on the cob. And it was integrated into this work. But it's an early indication of how he was seeing this form that already existed in commercial work and advertising work and was interested in it. But he moved on from that to make his own versions of these plastic formed works. And you can see 3 examples on the right. You see still life number 46, also an edition. In this case, all but one of the edition are illuminated. Great American Nude number 75, which is also illuminated. Again, like you might see a sign, a plastic sign illuminated from behind. And then you also see still life number 53, which is actually much like still life number 46, but not illuminated. And these were all works that were made by 2 different processes. I won't go into all of the specifics, but 2 different processes of molding plastic and then painted afterwards. If we go to the next slide, what's particularly challenging about these works is that with these 3 in particular, not all of Wesselmann's molded plastic works are this way, but with these 3 in particular that I'm showing, although they're considered individual artworks, they are almost visually identical. And so as a researcher doing catalogue raisonné research, we're treating them as individual artworks. And so we want to do a complete provenance on all of them. But of course, we can't visually identify the different works in the edition. So we're really dependent in this case on speaking to people that own them and documentary evidence that we would have in an archive. So these have been unique challenges to try to trace these down and specifically figure out who has which number in the edition. And as I said, because they're visually identical, this is the kind of challenge that you might often face with prints or multiples, but since these are individual works and we're doing complete provenance on all of them, we're facing it with works that we're doing extensive provenance research on. So still life number 53, if we go to the next slide, still life number 53 also has an artist inventory image. The only thing on the back of it that was relevant to our research was one note that edition number 2 had been donated to a college in Connecticut. I mean, it's helpful, but it's certainly not the end of the story. We knew also from estate records that there was a work at the Housatonic Museum of Art, which we figured out was affiliated with the Housatonic Community College. So pretty certain that that was where this work was. That was what this was referring to. And so that's great. And so we had a good hypothesis to work from, but of course, then we needed more documentary evidence for this. And so we had to go back to the correspondence, to the archive, and some of the work that Sam had processed to figure that out. And so then looking at that, we found these letters from someone by the name of Bert Chernow, documenting specifically the acquisition of this work by the Housatonic Museum of Art and allowing us to really kind of firmly document this. Now, at the same time that we were doing this, we were really happy to have this, and actually then went from there and reached out to the Housatonic Museum, and Robin Zello, the curator there, was extremely helpful, and we were able to really pin that down. But as we were doing this, we also realized that another work in the editions, in the Still Life number 53 edition, was apparently, according to estate records, also within about a 20-mile radius in Connecticut. Now, I will say, when I first saw this I'm going through the estate records, and I saw the work that's in Westport, Connecticut, and I saw this work at the Housatonic Museum, which is, about 20 miles away. And these are important, works, and it's a small edition, and they're early works. And at first, I thought that this couldn't be true. There must be some kind of mistake. There couldn't be two works from this small edition within 20 miles in suburban Connecticut. So I really wanted to make absolutely sure that there was not some kind of mistake here. And part of that work was also getting in contact with other people that I'll talk about in just a second. But a big way in which we pinned this down was, again, being able to go back to the correspondence. And we found, again, letters from Bert Chernow. And this is fascinating. So there are these two works. They're both within a 20-mile radius within Connecticut, and they're both acquired by this person, Bert Chernow. It turns out Bert Chernow is a really interesting figure who had a particular vision of integrating important works of art, important works of very contemporary art at the time, into public education, both at a secondary level and a primary level. And so, in fact, there were two works from this edition in Connecticut. And the first work was at a community college where Bert Chernow had headed the museum and the art department. And the second work, which is documented here, was acquired by what at the time was called the Westport Art Collection, now the Westport Public Art Collections, to be displayed in public schools in Westport, and acquired as a part of a major collection that he had put together that also included works by Lichtenstein, works by Warhol, to be displayed in public schools. And as you can see, because of the documentary evidence we had here, we were again able to pin down even the edition. And I again got in touch with the folks at Westport, and Kathy Benowitz there was extremely helpful. And that's actually the source of this newspaper clipping that she very helpfully sent over. And this is an amazing moment that I think Sam actually pointed out to me when she noticed this, that we have this newspaper clipping of this exhibition of this work that is dated the day after a letter to Wesselmann from the woman at the Westport Public Art Collection about this exhibition. So we were able to put all of these pieces together, and these two works that were in suburban Connecticut were otherwise visually identical, and as I said, would not have been able to be pinpointed without this research. We were able to pin down which edition was in which collection, and that indeed they were both in these collections in Connecticut. And so the last thing I'd like to talk about, just very briefly, is it really is interesting also where provenance research can lead. And I think oftentimes, you think about provenance research and you think about tracing works from private collection or major institution to major institution, but it really, and it is that, absolutely. It is also really tracing the life of works in places that you don't necessarily expect. And I was so pleased to get these images and see that still life number 53 has been in what you see there, Bedford Junior High School in 2014, actually the subject of a school art project that you see there, where students at the junior high made works based on Wesselmann. And I think this shows how this archival provenance research not only pinpoints and locates where a work is, but also gives you insight into the continued life of these objects and the ways in which they intersect with institutions and people's lives in ways that you otherwise might not know about. I particularly like the way that still life number 53 looks hanging over that elevator on the blue wall. It was great to see that. So that gives you a sense. And then if we go to the next slide, you can see that as of yesterday, we were able to publish both of these works on the corpus, pin everything down, and be able to make these both public. Just to clarify, these works are identical. They do, however, look slightly different when photographed under different light, and that is the difference that you're seeing between these two images. But they are in fact identical works, and you can go and check out both of them, as I said, on the corpus now. And so that concludes everything that I had to say about still life number 53. I will also, before we go to questions, just give you a bit of a sense, and Elizabeth will also talk about this, of some things that are coming up. Again, as I said, we plan to update the corpus on a quarterly basis. So keep an eye out for the next update. The major updates will come on quarterly basis. You might see small updates if you're very sharp-eyed in between, but major updates will come on a quarterly basis. And again, I recommend that you subscribe to the WPI's Verso newsletter. This is an email newsletter that will keep you informed of these updates. The other thing to check out are our oral histories, which are now live. I conducted an oral history with Jeffrey Sturgis, who's the director of exhibitions at the Tom Wesselmann Estate, where we talked about his work there. And it's a great interview and great insight into how the studio and the estate works. I also did an interview with Jeffrey with the curator Connie Glenn, who was extremely important to Wesselmann's career and put on some of his most important shows. And that will be coming up soon. That will be available soon. Also, fascinating history of Wesselmann and that era. So I highly encourage you to check that out. And the last thing I'll say, again, Elizabeth will mention all of these things, but just to re-emphasize, to make sure you know about all of them. Both Sam and I will be at the College Art Association this year in different capacities. So Sam will be chairing a panel. I will be a panelist. Elizabeth will give you the details, but if you are at the College Art Association in February this year, I hope you sign up for that. So with that, I think we can turn to a Q&A. So let's see. So let me just, I'm just reviewing the questions here. So let's see. First question, are any of the original Billboard fragments in the archive? If they are 3D, how are they scanned? That would be great. There are studio shots that have, like the ones that Sam showed, that are in the archive. But correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, but we don't have any actual fragments of collage material at the moment.
We have different source material. I mean, Tom did have a series of photographs that he used, taken of models, taken of various objects, sort of like as inspiration for his still lifes, like of a radio or various objects that were captured, but they're photographs. But no, unfortunately, we don't have any of those original fragments in our possession. I'm sure the studio still has remnants of those old poster boards. They're very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope eventually that is something that we actually can do. But you do mention that some of them are 3D. That would present a challenge, but it would be great.
Yeah.
So I see that there are yes, and actually I'm just seeing here that Jeffrey chimed in, Jeffrey Sturgis at the estate to remind us, and it's true that these billboards are at the studio. So this is not an impossible thing in the future. It's a potential future project.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Yes, thank you, Jeffrey. And actually, I should note that Jeffrey and everyone at the state were nice enough early on in my time working on this project to show us some of them, which was fantastic. So yes, I know that they are there. so I see that there are a few questions regarding tech, about outside linking and our catalog software. So I'll just kind of address these in general. I mean, generally we are using our own platform, which we are designing and using. So it's not, it's not any of the major platforms that are out, but a platform that we're using in-house. Yeah, when you mentioned the issue of maintenance and preventing, this is a question about if we link outside the corpus, how do we prevent link rot? How to prevent links from becoming inaccessible? That is certainly an issue. That's something that will certainly something that we'll be addressing when we roll out that functionality. I think that's absolutely a thing that we will be addressing. With copyright, it depends on the material. There's material that Sam and I are working on those issues with right now. When it comes to the images from that are of Wesselmann artworks, we have a blanket copyright through Arga and the estate, and so we're covered on that front. But as we move to other archival materials, we will deal with that issue, yeah, absolutely, on an individual basis, insofar as there are copyright issues. I think this is a question for you, Sam. Is there any fear that with information and images so easily accessible, your job as archivist may become obsolete? How do you envision your role of archivist continuing once the work is digitized and available online? Do you expect reference questions to increase or decrease with all these developments?
That's a really good question. I mean, I know there's a lot of technology in developments about like AI being able to sort of do like facial recognitions of images themselves, similar to like how you use like OCR in order to, for like, PDF document in order to sort of like find things. And I know that's been in the development. Am I personally worried? No. I mean, here I am in, 2020, was able to have access to this digital collection. I was able to work with it. I think that the technology and how it's advancing will only improve, I think, research for our users. There are other issues involved with that, but I think it still allows us to like disseminate this information more broadly, and I think it will take a human to control the AI in order to sort of be able to accomplish all of that. But no, for now I'm not worried, and I don't think it'll become, at least I hope I don't become obsolete. But yeah, for now, I'm very relevant in my position. But it's actually a good question too, now that I'm thinking about it in more detail. So to develop this webinar, I had already finished processing the papers, but to sort of go back into the archives and to look dig deeper and to see what we have available in terms of like really great images that could sort of exemplify and emphasize the points that we wanted to make. And I was noticing that there were some missing gaps, and I was actually able to like consult Huffa to see if he had any reference books that might be helpful in terms of like understanding who might have captured a certain image. And that's sort of something that we're working on now, especially with the copyright and the licensing of these images, because they have been scanned by us, but the physical archives belong to the estate, and that's our partnership. But we're not claiming copyright of these images. We're not selling them or reproducing them anyway. They're really for research and for educational purposes. But again, whatever I was able to ascertain and gather from the collection itself was the credit information on the back. But there are all these resources that I've been using, in addition, that I would use externally from the archives in order to sort of dig a little deeper to see if there are things that I can find that, might provide a little bit more context than what just the image itself conveys. So I hope that answers your question.
I think it does. I mean, I personally know that you have an enormous amount of work to do for ongoing future. So yeah. that I depend on. So
Yes.
yeah. This is a question actually I know is from Kathy Benowitz from Westport. So hello.
Oh, hi.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The Beard and Legacy Project. After listening to the Beard and Legacy Project with artists today, what inspired or motivated Wesselmann to start and maintain his archive? Was he conscious even in the early years of his impact, influence, and his own legacy? That's a really interesting question. I think he started, his archive developed over time. So it was not,
I mean, he didn't recognize it as an archive. I mean, it was his active artist papers. I mean, it's an archives now, but he was using it as his material. I mean, this was his administrative records. I mean, of course, I think he was also conscious of the fact that I think he would end up in some repository eventually. Actually, I think I have a letter from the Smithsonian asking him, like, hey, can I have access to your papers? So he was aware of who he was as an artist and that his legacy would be maintained. But yeah, just wanted to chime in there.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And actually, and the point that you're making, Sam, it's a really good point, because you actually have to think about this on different levels, because the archives in terms of correspondence, administrative records, and things like that, yeah, he was definitely keeping. I mean, I won't attempt to intuit his intentions, but those were things that were obviously important for pragmatic, practical purposes on an everyday basis. Then he was also this meticulous record keeper about his work, right?
Super thorough, yeah.
Just really thorough. And I think to a degree, yes, he did have a sense of his legacy. And I think that developed over time. And I think certainly by the 70s and 80s and the 90s, I think that was absolutely a part of his thinking in terms of trying to be precise about these things. You know, he wrote a monograph on himself under the pseudonym Slim Stealingworth in 1980. So he was very much concerned with how he would exist within art history. And I think, yes, that his work on organizing his body of work, you know, figuring out how to record it was part of that. That's actually, we could do an entire seminar, honestly, on his use of registration numbers and how he organized his ledger book. It is a fascinating subject and so detailed, I don't think I can even sort of open up that conversation right now, but suffice to say, yes, it is a very interesting and meticulous thinker about how to organize his work. Let me see if there are any other questions. If anybody else has any questions, please feel free to chime in. I think otherwise we're just about the end of our hour. Anything else? Yeah, so anything else you want to say, Sam, before we hand it back over to Elizabeth?
No, I just wanted to thank everyone. I know it's snowy. That you were able to sort of tune in and enjoy our talk tonight. And yeah, Huff and I will be both participating at separate panels for CAA, but we're hoping to also have some more talks coming this spring through the WPI, so stay tuned for that. That's also in development. Anyway, I'm gonna hand it over to Elizabeth. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you, Samantha and Huffa. That was fantastic, really fascinating. And just to return to the observation of the relevance of archivists, please keep in mind Samantha and Huffa prepared this entire presentation and did all of their research remotely. And it just shows the relevance of digital archives and archivists who need to parse digital archives. So bravo to both of you. Congratulations on this very informative talk. Now for some announcements. As Huffa mentioned, we have an oral histories project that just launched yesterday. If you please go to our website, wpi.art, you'll be able to see the oral history projects and the roster of speakers on these oral histories. We have 2 available now, and one of whom is Jeffrey Sturgis. And the other one is Sylvie Croussard, who is our Gauguin scholar. So please check out our oral histories projects as they continue to be made available in 2021. And then furthermore, as Huffa mentioned, we are going to be participating at CAA. Samantha is chairing a panel on February 21st called Paper Thin, Walking the Line Between Art and Ephemera, which is at noon. So please do tune into CAA and attend. Be very happy to have your participation. And then Huffa is a featured panelist at something apropos called Crisis and Invention Digital Publishing After 2020, which I'm sure is going to be talking about the relevance of digital publications during the time of COVID and lockdown and into the future. And that is on February 13th at 6 p.m. So thank you again for attending our webinar, and happy holidays to all of you, and hope to see you at our next webinar in 2021. Bye-bye.